In 1819, the United States experienced its first economic depression, so severe that it nearly destroyed the country just 30 years after the Constitution was ratified. And every mistake that caused it is being repeated right now in 2026. Most Americans have never heard of the panic of 1819. It's not taught in schools. It doesn't have the name recognition of the Great Depression or 2008. But this was the crisis that almost ended the American experiment. Banks collapsed across the country. Land values crashed by 70% overnight. Unemployment hit levels not seen again until the 1930s. Entire states nearly went bankrupt. And here's what makes it terrifying. Every single cause of the panic of 1819 is happening again today. The land speculation bubble, the easy credit explosion, the international trade shock, the bank failures, the political paralysis. So in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what happened in 1819, why it matters more than any economic history you were taught, and most importantly, how the exact same pattern is unfolding right now with the same inevitable conclusion. Because those who don't learn from history are condemned to repeat it, and we're repeating it. To understand the panic, you need to understand the boom that came before it. In 1815, the Napoleonic Wars finally ended. For 20 years, Europe had been tearing itself apart in constant warfare. Farmland was destroyed, trade routes disrupted, entire economies devastated. But America was relatively untouched. While Europe burned, American farmers prospered by feeding both sides. Cotton, wheat, tobacco, American agricultural exports exploded. Prices for commodities hit all-time highs. Farmers made fortunes, land values soared. Everyone wanted to buy more land to grow more crops to sell to Europe at inflated prices. Then in 1816, Congress chartered the Second Bank of the United States. This was the Federal Reserve of its day, a central bank designed to stabilize the currency and regulate state banks. But instead of restraint, the bank opened the floodgates of credit. State banks, no longer restrained by hard money requirements, started lending recklessly. Anyone who wanted money could get it. The requirement for loans was basically having a pulse. Farmers borrowed to buy more land. Speculators borrowed to flip land. Merchants borrowed to expand. Everyone borrowed because asset prices only went up. Sound familiar? Land speculation became the national obsession. Whole territories in the West were carved up and sold on credit. Alabama, Mississippi, Illinois, Missouri, land was selling for 10, 20, 30 times what it cost just 5 years earlier. People were buying land they'd never seen with money they didn't have, convinced they'd flip it for massive profits. The original house flipping bubble, just with farmland instead of suburban homes. Credit expanded at an insane pace. Between 1850 and 1810, the money supply in America roughly tripled. Banks were printing paper money backed by almost nothing, lending it out, and watching the economy go parabolic. By 1818, the warning signs were everywhere, but everyone ignored them. Europe was recovering. European farmers were back in production. Demand for American agricultural exports started falling. Commodity prices began declining from their artificial highs, but Americans didn't adjust. They kept borrowing, kept speculating, kept assuming prices would rise forever. The Second Bank of the United States, realizing it had created a monster, suddenly reversed course. In late 1818, the bank started demanding that state banks redeem their paper currency for hard money, gold and silver. This exposed a huge problem. The state banks had issued far more paper money than they had gold to back it. They'd loaned out money that didn't exist. When the second bank demanded redemption, state banks couldn't pay. They started calling in their loans, demanding borrowers repay immediately. But the borrowers couldn't pay either. They'd borrowed based on inflated land values that were already declining. The whole pyramid was built on credit by overvalued assets backed by more credit. Then in early 1819, the dam broke. European commodity prices collapsed as supply caught up with demand. American cotton that sold for a pound in 1818 dropped to 14 cents by mid-1819. Wheat fell by 50%. Tobacco crashed. Farmers who'd borrowed heavily based on high crop prices suddenly couldn't service their debt. Land they bought for $20 an acre was now worth $6, and nobody was buying anyway. What happened next was economic carnage on a scale America had never experienced. Banks started failing in a cascade. When one bank collapsed, it couldn't repay other banks, which caused them to fail. By the end of 1819, hundreds of banks had closed their doors permanently. People's savings evaporated overnight. Paper money from failed banks became worthless. If you had $1,000 in banknotes on Monday, By Friday, you had toilet paper. Land values collapsed by 70 to 80% across the country. The Western territories were hit hardest. Land in Alabama that sold for $30 an acre in 1818 couldn't find $4 in 1820. Speculators were destroyed. People who'd borrowed to buy land at peak prices now owed more than the land was worth. They couldn't sell, couldn't repay, and lost everything. Foreclosures exploded. Banks and creditors seized property from anyone who couldn't pay. Farmers who'd worked land for generations lost it to foreclosure. Entire communities were displaced. Unemployment spiked to levels estimated between 25 and 50% in urban areas. Factories closed because nobody could buy their products. Construction stopped because there was no credit. Shipping ground to a halt because trade collapsed. The economic activity just disappeared. Money velocity, the rate at which money circulates through the economy, collapsed. Even people with money stopped spending because they were terrified of what came next. Debtors' prisons filled up. In the early 1800s, if you couldn't pay your debts, you could be imprisoned. Thousands of Americans ended up in jail for debt, which made it even more impossible for them to repay since they couldn't work. Social cohesion broke down. Neighbors turned on neighbors over debts. Families disintegrated. Crime spiked. There were riots in several cities. The political system was paralyzed. Debtors wanted relief, wanted debt forgiveness, wanted the government to intervene. Creditors wanted enforcement, wanted to collect what they were owed, wanted the government to stay out. Congress debated endlessly, but did almost nothing. The federal government had limited powers and limited revenue. Most politicians believed the economy had to correct itself. The human cost was staggering. In cities like Philadelphia, Cincinnati, and Baltimore, homeless encampments appeared as foreclosed families had nowhere to go. Soup kitchens couldn't keep up with demand. Malnutrition and disease spread. In the Western territories, entire settlements were abandoned. People who'd moved west for opportunity returned east as penniless refugees, or just disappeared into the wilderness. The Depression lasted officially from 1819 to 1821, but the effects persisted through the mid-1820s. It took nearly the economy to fully recover. Some states tried to help. Kentucky passed stay laws that delayed foreclosures. Several states issued paper currency to ease credit conditions. Tennessee passed laws limiting what creditors could seize. But these measures were controversial and often made things worse. Creditors stopped lending entirely if they couldn't collect. Economic activity froze even more. The Supreme Court actually struck down some state relief laws as violations of contract rights. So even when states tried to help their citizens, the federal judiciary blocked them. The Second Bank of the United States became massively unpopular. People blamed it for both causing the boom through easy credit and causing the bust through sudden contraction. The political backlash against the bank lasted decades and ultimately led to its charter not being renewed in the 1830s. This crisis fundamentally changed American politics. It created the split between debtors and creditors, agricultural interests and banking interests, that defined political conflicts for the next 50 years. It also created lasting distrust of banks and paper money. Many Americans went back to demanding payment only in gold and silver, refusing to trust bank notes for decades. The Panic of 1819 should have taught America several critical lessons. Lesson 1: asset bubbles always pop. When prices for any asset, land, stocks, crypto, whatever, rise far beyond any rational valuation based on actual productive value, a crash is inevitable. Always. The land in Alabama wasn't actually worth $30 an acre in 1818. It was worth maybe $5 based on what you could grow on it. The other $25 was pure speculation bubble. When bubbles pop, price returns to actual value, and everyone holding at peak prices gets destroyed. Lesson 2: easy credit creates artificial booms. When banks lend recklessly, when anyone can borrow regardless of ability to repay, it creates economic activity that isn't sustainable. The boom feels great, but it's built on debt that will eventually need to be repaid. Lesson 3: financial contagion spreads fast. When interconnected banks and businesses fail, the collapse cascades through the entire system. One failure triggers another, which triggers another. Modern financial systems are even more interconnected than 1819, making contagion faster and more devastating. Lesson 4: commodity price crashes destroy debt-based economies. When you borrow based on high prices for what you produce, and those prices collapse, the debt becomes unpayable. This applies to in 1819, oil companies in 2015, and anyone whose business model depends on sustained high prices. Lesson 5. There's no easy policy fix. Governments and central banks have limited tools to stop a credit collapse once it starts. Printing money causes inflation. Austerity causes depression. There's no pain-free solution. Lesson 6. Political paralysis makes it worse. When the political system can't agree on a response, when creditors and debtors fight instead of compromising, the crisis deepens and lasts longer. Lesson 7. The social costs are enormous. Economic crashes destroy more than wealth. They destroy communities, families, trust, social cohesion. The recovery from social damage takes longer than economic recovery. Did America learn these lessons? No. The exact same pattern repeated in 1837, another land speculation bubble. Then 1873, more railroad speculation. Then 1893, then 1907, then 1929, then 2008. Every generation thinks it's different. Every generation thinks the boom will last forever. Every generation learns the same painful lesson the hard way. Now let me show you how we're repeating every mistake. The easy credit boom. From 2008 to 2022, interest rates were near zero. Anyone could borrow massive amounts for almost nothing, just like the second bank flooding the economy with credit in 1816 to 1818. The asset bubble, housing prices, stock prices, crypto, all went parabolic. Prices disconnected completely from underlying value, just like land prices in 1818. The speculation mania. People buying assets they didn't understand with money they didn't have, convinced prices only go up. Flip this house, flip this meme stock. Same psychology as 1819 land speculation, the credit expansion, the money supply exploded. M2 money supply increased by 40% from 2020 to 2022, similar proportional increase to 1815 to 1818, the international shock. In 1819 it was the end of Napoleonic Wars causing commodity crash. Today it's pandemic disruption, supply chain chaos, war in Ukraine, deglobalization. Different cause, same effect on trade and prices, the sudden tightening. The second bank demanding redemption in 1818 is the Federal Reserve hiking rates in 2022 to 2023. Same sudden shift from easy money to tight money. The cascading failures. In 1819, banks failed, triggering more bank failures. In 2023, we saw Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, First Republic. The contagion pattern starting. The commercial real estate crash. Land values collapsing in 1819 is commercial real estate collapsing now. Office buildings worth 70% less than 2019. Same dynamic. The political paralysis. Debtors versus creditors in 18 is progressives versus conservatives today. Same inability to agree on solutions. Same gridlock while crisis deepens. The social breakdown. Homeless encampments then and now. Rising crime then and now. Community disintegration then and now. Political extremism then and now. We are literally following the same script, beat by beat. Here's what makes the 2026 version potentially more catastrophic than 1819. First, the scale. In 1819, America had maybe 10 million people, mostly farmers who could at least grow their own food. Today we have 340 million people in a complex urban economy where nobody can subsist independently. Second, the interconnection. In 1819, a bank failure in Kentucky didn't immediately crash banks in Massachusetts. Today, banks, markets, and globally interconnected. Contagion is instantaneous. Third, the leverage. Debt levels today, government, corporate, household, are multiples higher relative to income in anything in 1819. More debt means more painful deleveraging. Fourth, the derivatives. The 1819 economy was simple. Today we have complex financial instruments, derivatives, structured products that create hidden leverage and contagion paths. When these unwind, nobody knows where the damage appears. Fifth, the social safety net paradox. We have safety nets now that didn't exist in 1819, which is good. But those safety nets depend on government revenue, which collapses in depression. And they create expectations that government will fix things, leading to political chaos when it can't. Sixth, the distrust. Social trust in institutions, government, media, each other is lower now than possibly any point in American history. This makes collective action and recovery harder. The Panic of 1819 nearly destroyed America 30 years after independence. It took a decade to recover. It changed politics for a generation. It left scars that lasted 50 years. And we learned nothing. Every cause at 1810 is present today. The easy credit boom, the asset bubble, the speculation mania, the sudden tightening, the international shock, the cascading failures. The pattern is identical. The only question is whether the outcome will be identical or worse. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And right now, the rhyme scheme is pointing toward economic catastrophe that will reshape America just like 1819 did. If this made you realize we're repeating a crisis from 200 years ago that we should have learned from, share it. Subscribe because I'll be tracking whether 2026 follows the 1819 pattern to its devastating conclusion. Those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. We didn't study it. Now we're repeating it. Your move.